On the morning of June 5, 1989, in the heart of Beijing, history paused. The wide expanse of Chang'an Avenue, still echoing with the heavy tracks of military tanks, became the stage for one of the most haunting and unforgettable images of the 20th century. Just a day before, Tiananmen Square had been cleared with brutal force, leaving the world stunned as peaceful calls for democracy were met with the roar of gunfire and the crush of armored vehicles. The air was heavy with silence, yet beneath that silence lingered the echoes of fear, grief, and unimaginable loss. And then he appeared. A solitary man dressed not as a soldier or a revolutionary, but as an ordinary citizen, white shirt, dark trousers, and in his hand, 2 shopping bags. He could have been anyone, a worker, a student, a passerby on his way home. Yet in that moment, he embodied every voice that had been silenced, every dream that had been trampled under. The weight of oppression. Without a word, without a weapon, he stepped into the path of a column of advancing tanks. Imagine the scene, a line of steel giants stretching down the avenue, their turrets casting shadows like a storm approaching, and in front of them, this single figure, fragile, human, impossibly small. He raised his hand, signaling the lead tank to stop. Against all logic, against every instinct of survival, he refused to move. The first tank halted, engines rumbling, exhaust filling the air. The man shifted with it, blocking its every attempt to go around him. Left, right, it didn't matter. He was immovable. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Soldiers inside the tanks waited for orders, perhaps confused, perhaps hesitant. The world, watching later through smuggled film and broadcasted images, saw not just a man standing before machines, but humanity itself confronting power. What drove him? Perhaps it was grief at the massacre that had unfolded the night before. Perhaps it was anger or despair or a desperate act of courage born in the knowledge that silence was no longer bearable. He may never have believed he could stop the tanks, but he knew he could not allow them to pass without resistance. In his stillness was defiance. In his frailty was strength. Onlookers gasped, some shouted, but none dared to join him. He was utterly alone. Yet in his aloneness, he became a symbol, universal, undeniable, unforgettable. His simple act spoke louder than any speech, louder than any weapon, a cry that one individual, no matter how ordinary, can stand against the crushing weight of injustice. The confrontation did not last long. After a tense standoff, 2 men rushed from the sidelines, perhaps friends, perhaps strangers, and pulled him away into the crowd. His identity remains a mystery, his fate unknown. Some believe he was executed, others say he escaped. What matters most is not the man himself, but the moment he created, a moment where the balance of power shifted, if only for a heartbeat, from the state to a solitary citizen. The world never learned the true identity of the man who stopped the tanks that day. He could have been a student, a worker, a shopkeeper returning home with groceries, ordinary in every sense, yet unforgettable in the way he embodied defiance. What we do know is that after those tense minutes, he was pulled away from the street by concerned bystanders. Some accounts suggest he was arrested, others that he melted back into anonymity. The truth remains a mystery, sealed by silence and the passage of time, and perhaps that mystery itself has added to the power of his act. The government tried to erase the memory of June 4th, 1989. In China, any mention of the protests was censored. Photos were banned, discussions silenced, textbooks rewritten. Generations have grown up never hearing the story in full. Yet despite every effort to bury it, the image of the man with shopping bags facing down the armored column slipped past the walls of censorship and entered history as collective memory. That photograph became one of the most recognizable symbols of resistance in the 20th century, carried on magazine covers, broadcast on television, and later spread across the internet. For the soldiers inside the tanks, the moment must have been unforgettable as well. Trained to follow orders, they were confronted by a lone civilian who refused to move. That hesitation, their refusal to run him down in that instant, suggests the power of a single human life to disrupt even the mightiest machine of war. For the students who had already faced tear gas, arrests, and bullets, the nameless man embodied the courage they had carried into the square, and for the watching world, his quiet stand became a mirror reflecting the universal longing for freedom, dignity, and the right to be heard. Over the decades, his image has inspired countless movements around the world. From Prague to Cairo, from Hong Kong to Kyiv, protesters have invoked Tank Man as a reminder that one individual's refusal to bow can ignite a spark of hope in the darkest times. His act did not topple the regime that day. The tanks eventually rolled forward, and the square was cleared with devastating human cost. But the lesson of his courage lies not in immediate victory, but in the way it still echoes decades later. He showed the world that silence can be broken, even when voices are crushed. And so, as we reflect on the tank man of Tiananmen Square, we are left with a paradox, a man without a name who became immortal, a fleeting act of defiance that turned into a permanent symbol. He reminds us that history is often shaped not just by leaders and armies, but by ordinary people who, in one defining moment, choose courage over fear. His stand forces us to ask ourselves when confronted with injustice, would we dare to stop the tanks in our own lives? The legacy of that image endures not because it ended oppression in one day, but because it continues to whisper across generations that even in the shadow of overwhelming power, humanity can still rise, unarmed and unbroken.